The Cleveland Browns quarterback plan for 2026 is obvious to me. I'm going to tell you the latest I'm hearing on the situation, who the Browns could realistically be starting in 2026, and what direction they are trending in most likely. Before I dive in, I want you to get in the comments section right now and sound off. Pick the Browns starting quarterback for next year. If you think it should be Shedeur Sanders, type SS. If you think it's Deshaun Watson, type DG. If for some reason you think it's Gabriel, type DG. Or if it's a different quarterback, maybe not even on the roster right now, type O for other. I think the solution for Cleveland next year comes from a guy that is already on this roster. So let's go through the names one by one, eliminate who is not the answer, and explain exactly why this decision is far simpler than people are making it out to be. Gabriel is out of the mix. Let me just say that plainly. He didn't pass the eye test. He looked bad. He's supposed to be a quarterback that can be pinpoint accurate because he doesn't leave the pocket, but that's just not even close to the case at all. The entire premise of Gabriel as an NFL starting quarterback is built on the idea that his accuracy and pocket presence can compensate for his lack of athleticism and downfield explosiveness. He delivered none of that. When you watch the film, there is no moment where you come away convinced that this is a guy capable of running an NFL offense at a starting level. The accuracy that was supposed to be his calling card simply was not there. He was not just inconsistent, he was unconvincing in every meaningful way. There is no serious argument to hand Gabriel the starting job heading into 2026. That conversation is closed. Now, Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson tore his Achilles twice and is now 30 years old. Do you really think he's going to magically turn back to Pro Bowl form, which was 6 years ago after tearing his Achilles twice and having multiple injuries? It's unlikely. Let's be direct about this. The Achilles is one of the most punishing injuries a football player can suffer. Tearing it once fundamentally changes how a quarterback moves, how quickly he can process, how fast he gets the ball out under pressure. Watson has torn it twice. The explosiveness, the pocket mobility, the ability to extend plays that once made him dangerous, those attributes are almost certainly gone at this stage of his career. His last stretch of genuinely elite play was with the Houston Texans before the 2020 season, and that was before the legal proceedings, before the suspension, before the injuries stacked on top of each other. The physical toll his body has taken is simply too significant to bet the franchise on. Deshaun Watson is not the answer in 2026. And committing any meaningful resources in his direction would be a mistake the organization could not afford to make. So, of course, the Browns are going to start Shedeur Sanders. He will be the day one starter in 2026. I believe it to be the case. And here is the full argument for why that is the only logical direction. First of all, there's no point in having Shedeur Sanders sit on the bench. What is the point in that? The fans want him out there. He brings people to the games. Keeping a young quarterback with demonstrated upside on the sideline, behind quarterbacks who have already shown they are not the answer, accomplishes absolutely nothing for this organization's development or competitive trajectory. The Cleveland Browns need to know what they have in Shedeur Sanders, and the only way to find that out is to put him on the field with real support around him. We at least saw good from Shedeur last year, more positives from him than any other Browns quarterback on the roster last season. That is not a subjective assessment built on blind optimism. That is what the film shows when you watch it honestly. There were throws last season that stopped you mid-play and made you recalibrate entirely what you thought about this kid's potential. Think of the throw down the sideline to Harold Fannin Jr., an absolute dot, placed exactly where only the receiver could catch it. Think of the 60-yard touchdown to Jeudy, a throw that required anticipation, arm strength, and placement, all operating at an elite level simultaneously. Think of the 52-yard completion to Isaiah Bond in his very first start, being thrown out there having never had meaningful reps with the first-team offense. Some of those throws made you stop and say, okay, I'm back in. I'm intrigued again. Those are not the throws of a quarterback who cannot play in this league. And then there is the Titans game, the one I can't unsee. Shedeur Sanders threw for 364 yards, delivered 3 touchdown passes, scored 4 total touchdowns including a rushing score, and refused to quit when the team was down 2 scores in the fourth quarter. He took the team on his back in that game. Everybody else on that roster failed him, and he still nearly won it. That game is the clearest single-game evidence that Shedeur Sanders is capable of carrying a football team when the moment demands it. He went 3-4 as a starter, the best record of all the Browns quarterbacks who started last season. That is a documented fact. And what makes that number even more meaningful is the context in which those 3 wins came, behind the worst offensive line in the NFL, with a wide receiver room that ranked at the bottom of the league in reliability, inside a system that was not designed to maximize his strengths. Yes, there were bad games. The Niners game was difficult to watch. The Bears game was equally frustrating. It was not a smooth, linear progression. It was a roller coaster of starts that ranged from genuinely impressive to genuinely concerning. He is absolutely a project. Nobody is claiming otherwise. But the critical point is this. See what you have in him behind a better offensive line next year before drafting yet another rookie quarterback. That is the logical, responsible approach for an organization that has burned through quarterback after quarterback without ever committing to building properly around one. And that brings us directly to the real problem, because Shedeur Sanders was not operating behind an NFL-caliber offensive line last season. Not even close. ESPN analyst Mike Clay put out a color-coded chart grading offensive lines across the entire league. Red means those players should not be starting offensive linemen in the NFL. The Cleveland Browns' offensive line was complete red across every single position, every spot. Wyatt Teller is leaving in free agency. Jack Conklin is probably not coming back either. Jedrick Wills remains in a difficult and uncertain situation. 4 of their offensive linemen are free agents heading into this offseason. This is the worst offensive line situation in the league, and the numbers prove it without any room for debate. Cam Robinson allowed a 9.1% pressure rate, ranked 32nd out of 34 qualifying left tackles in the entire NFL. Running backs on this team averaged just 0.4 yards before contact per carry, dead last in the league. That means Browns running backs were getting hit behind the line of scrimmage before they even had a chance to reach the line of scrimmage itself. That is not a quarterback problem. That is a structural, systemic failure up front that no quarterback in the history of this league could fully overcome. I don't care what quarterback you are. If you know anything about football at all, ask any quarterback in the league. Having a good offensive line versus a bad one matters enormously. Look at Sam Darnold winning a Super Bowl right now because of how good everything around him is. Having a good offensive line makes a massive difference in the NFL. That is not a complex analytical point. That is the most fundamental truth in professional football, and the Browns ignored it for far too long. The supporting cast failures extended beyond the offensive line as well. Jerry Jeudy posted a 21% drop rate on targets 10-plus yards downfield, ranked dead last, 41st out of 41 wide receivers in that category. He was also top 3 in the league in total drops for the entire season. Some of the throws Shedeur delivered were perfectly placed, on the money, on time, on target, and they still hit the ground because the receiver could not hold on. That is not a quarterback failing. That is a receiver failing, and it cost Shedeur Sanders statistics, momentum, and wins that should have been on his record. Beyond personnel, the system itself under Kevin Stefanski did Shedeur Sanders no favors whatsoever. Not having Stefanski going forward will benefit Shedeur in a significant and tangible way. Todd Monken is the perfect coach to take on this project. Under Monken's system, one built around quarterback decision-making, route concepts that create space, and an offense designed to let a young quarterback operate with clarity, Shedeur Sanders is going to look night and day compared to what we watched last season. That is not speculation. That is a recognition of how dramatically environment and system shape quarterback performance at the NFL level. The talent was visible even inside a broken system. Put that talent inside a functional one, and the results will follow. Now for the people who still want to look elsewhere at the quarterback position, let's go through the actual market, because the free agent options this offseason are not what anyone is hoping for. This is not a cycle where the Cleveland Browns can go out and find a credible upgrade at quarterback through free agency. The names available are not inspiring, the price tags attached to some of them are not justified, and the organizational logic of chasing any of them simply does not hold up when you examine it honestly. Your top available free agent quarterbacks this offseason are Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, and Daniel Jones. That is the list. That is what the market offers. And that is not a list that should generate any real excitement inside the Browns organization or among their fan base. These are quarterbacks at the back end of their careers, players with significant injury histories, declining production, and a track record over recent seasons that does not suggest meaningful revival is coming. Aaron Rodgers has not played a full healthy season in years. Russell Wilson just had his most humbling stretch of football in his entire career. Daniel Jones is likely heading back to Indianapolis, and even if he were available, he represents nothing close to a franchise-level solution. These are quarterbacks who cost money the Browns do not have available to waste, and none of them represent a genuine upgrade over a young quarterback on a rookie deal who has already shown flashes of legitimate NFL-caliber play. Spending limited cap space on any of these names would be one of the worst roster decisions this organization could make heading into 2026. Then there is the Malik Willis conversation, because everybody seems to be linking him to Cleveland right now, and that narrative needs to be addressed directly. Malik Willis is essentially an unproven quarterback at the NFL level. He has shown athletic traits and enough raw ability to generate buzz, but buzz does not win football games, and buzz does not justify the financial commitment being discussed. Why use your limited cap space to pay Malik Willis $25 million? That is the question nobody pushing the Willis narrative seems willing to answer with any real specificity. Because if you put Malik Willis behind this offensive line right now, with this supporting cast, inside a system still being rebuilt, he is going to look the same as every other quarterback who has struggled in that environment. Willis would face the exact same structural problems that made life difficult for every quarterback who took snaps for Cleveland last season. The offensive line would still be breaking down. The wide receivers would still be dropping footballs. the system would still be transitioning. None of those variables change, simply because the name on the back of the jersey changes. Willis is going to look the same as everybody else has if you just added him to the Browns right now. The system is the problem. The infrastructure is the problem, and paying a quarterback $25 million to walk into that same broken infrastructure does not fix a single thing. It just drains the cap space that needs to be directed toward actually solving the problem. The limited cap space the Browns have available this offseason should go directly toward building the offensive line and acquiring a legitimate wide receiver one. That is where the investment needs to happen, not on a replacement quarterback who solves nothing structurally and arrives with his own set of questions still unanswered. Now let's talk about the 2026 draft, because some people are pointing toward the draft as the place where Cleveland finds its answer at quarterback. The reality of this draft class needs to be understood clearly before anyone builds a strategy around it. There are no elite quarterback options in the 2026 class outside of Mendoza. The depth simply is not there, and the path to Mendoza runs directly through the Las Vegas Raiders, who hold the #1 overall pick, and the Raiders are not going to budge on that pick. There is no realistic scenario being discussed in which Cleveland acquires that selection, and chasing it would cost this organization assets it cannot afford to surrender. The Browns enter this offseason holding 10 draft picks. 10. That is a significant amount of draft capital, and every one of those picks needs to be deployed with a clear purpose: building the offensive line, upgrading the wide receiver room, and adding depth to a defense that is facing some uncertainty of its own. Those picks are the foundation of what this roster can become over the next 2 seasons, and burning them in pursuit of a quarterback who may not even be available is not a sound organizational strategy. Here is the bigger picture that makes the Shedeur Sanders development strategy even more compelling. When you step back and look at it honestly, the 2027 quarterback class is stacked in a way that the 2026 class simply is not. Dante Moore would have been a 2nd overall pick if he had declared this year. He chose to stay, and he will be available in 2027. C.J. Carr might be a top 5 pick next year. Arch Manning would have been a 1st-round selection if he had declared this year. And if he builds on what he showed at the end of last season, he will be among the most coveted prospects in that entire class. Dylan Raiola and Lenoir Sears are also legitimate options in that conversation. The talent and depth in the 2027 class is notably and substantially better than anything available in 2026. The strategy writes itself when you lay it out this way. Use 2026 to develop Shedeur Sanders inside a functional system, with a rebuilt offensive line, with a legitimate receiving option at wide receiver 1. Evaluate him honestly over the course of a full season, with real support around him, something he never had last year. If that evaluation confirms he is the long-term answer, you have found your franchise quarterback on a rookie deal. If that evaluation raises legitimate concerns that cannot be overlooked, you enter the 2027 draft with clarity, with cap flexibility, and with one of the deepest quarterback classes in recent memory waiting for you. There is nothing to lose by running this process correctly. Shedeur is on a rookie deal. The risk is minimal. The potential upside is enormous. Now, shifting to the defensive side of the ball, because there is a significant injury situation the Browns need to monitor and plan around carefully heading into this offseason, and it has real implications for how Cleveland approaches their roster construction. Mary Kay Cabot reported that it is doubtful Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah will ever return to the football field. That was a crushing report for anyone who has been following this team and dreaming about what that defense could look like, with Jock and Swisser operating together at linebacker. The injury was brutal, and the honest question any medical professional has to ask is whether a doctor will realistically clear him to play professional football again at that level. However, the situation is not as settled as that initial report suggested. Jock responded directly on Instagram, questioning the sourcing of that report, essentially asking where that information came from, pushing back on the characterization publicly, and making clear that nothing official had been communicated to him. The situation remains unofficial and unconfirmed, but it is genuinely concerning, and the Browns cannot afford to build their linebacker depth chart around a player whose availability for 2026 is this uncertain. That uncertainty makes the Devin Bush conversation an important one. In the 2025 season, Bush was one of the most productive linebackers on that entire roster. He posted 125 tackles, recorded 2 sacks, forced 2 fumbles, and added pick sixes to a arsenal that looked finished just a few years ago. Linebacker coach Jason Tarver, who remains on the Browns staff heading into next season, deserves significant credit for reviving Bush's career and getting that level of performance out of him. The combination of Bush's renewed commitment and Tarver's coaching produced something genuinely valuable for that defense last year, and walking away from it without cause would be a mistake. Bush is a free agent. If Jock cannot return to the field, retaining Devin Bush makes clear and logical defensive sense. This is not a sentimental decision. It is a practical one grounded in what he actually produced last season and what the linebacker position needs heading into 2026. The one firm caveat is cost structure. The franchise tag for a linebacker runs approximately $27 million, And that number is simply not one the Browns can justify committing to a single linebacker position, given everything else this roster needs. That tag figure is off the table entirely. What would need to happen is a negotiated, team-friendly contract that keeps Bush in Cleveland without crippling the cap space that needs to go toward the offensive line and the wide receiver room. If that structure can be reached, Devin Bush belongs back on this roster. So let me know, do you want the Browns to re-sign Devin Bush? Type R for re-sign, type D for don't. Drop it in the comments right now. The direction for this organization heading into 2026 is clear across every position group. Build the offensive line, upgrade at wide receiver, keep this defense intact as much as possible, and give Shedeur Sanders the environment he never had last season. Because what he showed inside a broken system was already enough to believe that the right system will produce something worth watching in Cleveland.